That's
We're
your
recording.
okay. What happens if you don't click something?
Got it.
Got it.
Got it.
But if you don't click got it and you don't click the leave meeting, what happens?
Happens anyway.
Yeah. All right. Did you just see somebody else came in, Adrian? Are you watching?
I just slid in.
Lynn Kurzweil just came in.
So I'm going to start this by introducing someone who I keep saying doesn't need an introduction. Tia and I were figuring this out. We met somewhere around 1999 when she was an experienced member of the what we called then the Interfaith Hospitality Board. And I was joining the board in 99. And then we were board members. She was president of the board. And then she stepped in to really, I think, save and build the organization as the executive director. I think Tia moving up to the president of the executive director of IHN in, I don't know of what year exactly, really started to professionalize the organization. That's when they moved to first South Orange. And actually you moved us to Montclair.
Right.
And became our neighbor on Park Street. And the work of IHN has grown tremendously since then. And unfortunately, and I'll let Tia kind of start there. Unfortunately, what everyone thought when IHN started, that this was a temporary solution to a temporary problem, the need for IHN has grown equally significantly. It is now called Family Promise. And with that, Tia, what's going on? What's the picture of homelessness now in the country, in Essex County?
Well, first, let me say thank you for having me here this evening. I'm delighted to be with all of you. It's a pleasure to see your faces. Some of you I recognize, and some of you may know me, but I'm glad to be back and thrilled to be here talking to you tonight. So homelessness, as Shirley said, has not gone away as we thought it would. I mean, I remember a time when, the thought of a homeless family was a novel idea. When we talked about the homeless, we pictured sort of the single disheveled male, in the subway station in New York. The fact that there were homeless families was incredible. And here we are all these years later, and homelessness family homelessness has almost become, we're blind to the problem. So it's a big problem across the United States. I don't know if you're aware of this, but the poverty line for a family of four is marked by having an annual income of $26,200. And there are 1 in 6 US children that are living in poverty. 11 million households pay more than 50% of their income on housing. So the fact that families with children are falling into homelessness is no surprise given these facts. Families with children comprise about 35% of the homeless population nationwide. They estimate 2.5 million children will experience homelessness this year in America. So it's not a pretty picture, folks, and it is a national problem. I know going out, I don't know if any of you have been out to California, but visiting my daughter in California, there are homeless families, camping on the sides of the major freeways out there. It's exploded across the country. And so what's happening here in Essex County? There is what every year they do a point in time count. So in January of 2020, which is the last date that we have numbers for, they counted, volunteers go out on the street and count families on the street and count all the families in the shelters, and they counted 289 homeless families on that one night. So those were, families with at least one child in tow. And for the same period of time, the Essex County, the Department of Education counts the number of homeless children in schools. And there were, I forget the exact figure. I just looked this up and I didn't look it up again today, but it was slightly over 1,000 children in Essex County schools that report as experiencing homelessness. And that was within a given calendar year. And as you can imagine, kids that are in public school have younger children, have younger siblings and may have older siblings. So that I feel is a more accurate count of the numbers of people that we're seeing. There are, as you're aware, Family Promise is kind of bracing for the lifting of the moratorium on evictions at the end of this year. From what I understand, there are 14,000 cases pending in New Jersey courts. And I've been told, because there's an RFP out from the Department of Community Action that for a particular housing navigator position. But anyway, that Essex County has the most cases pending in the entire of all the counties in the state. So all the agencies within Essex County are kind of bracing for an onslaught of homelessness after the first of the year. Today was actually the last day today or tomorrow, the 15th, is the last day that families can can self-certify. They have to and apply for back rent assistance through the county. So, we have tried to get that message out to families. After that, there will be no relief available to them through the courts. So that's kind of where we are. And
so, Tia, given there will be more homeless families as soon as the eviction moratorium lifts. We all know at Shomrei that we haven't hosted families now for a year and a half, essentially. What is Family Promise doing without the hosting program, and what's going on at Family Promise?
Well, I think when you think of Family Promise, and this is across the country, but in Essex County particularly, you can think of our programs as falling in kind of three broad areas. First, and we're providing sort of a holistic response to ending family homelessness. And so what we want to do is, in the first place, try to prevent or divert families from becoming homeless in the first place. Right? That's a biggie. Like, let's try not to have any more homeless people come into the system, because we don't have enough shelter space. We don't have enough housing. We don't have enough assistance for people. So we try to prevent people from coming in. Then the second area of focus for us is, of course, the emergency shelter program, which you are all familiar with, at least in its past version. And then the last area of focus that I would talk about is what we do to get families into housing and then stabilize them once they're in housing. So if you think about it, it's kind of it's a circle. Prevent people from coming in. If they do slip into homeless, provide safe family shelter, and then once we get them housed, try to keep them housed and keep preventing them from coming back. So that's why I think of it as a circle of care for families.
So there's a question that came in, so I'll divert us. But do you know, the question is, how much does a family of four receive through welfare in New Jersey? And the assumption is that it's a lot less than what you just said is necessary to stay out of poverty.
Right. I don't have that figure at my fingertips. I could look that up, but yeah, temporary assistance for needy families is a very small amount of money. A lot of our families actually do get SNAP benefits, food benefits. So a lot of the families that come into the shelter have those benefits. That is easier to get than cash assistance.
And some of them are working low-wage jobs.
Yes.
So if
A
somebody's
lot of them.
got a background, Adrian, can you see if you can mute? I think it may be Toby. Perfect. Well done. Thank you. So going to what you were just talking about, talk about some of the prevention work that you're talking about.
So prevention, well, let's start with diversion. Diversion is when someone shows up, looking for shelter. And so the first thing a case manager will do in talking to a family is, well, tell us where you slept last night. And if it's like, well, I was with mom, but they kicked me out because they, whatever, we weren't getting along, or, I was with my sister, but we were eating too many of their groceries, so they kicked us out. Well, let's talk about that. Like, do you think if we called your mom or your sister that you could potentially stay there? Can we mediate on your behalf? Like, if we provided some grocery gift cards, would it help? So we try to get families to think about what resources they have to keep them from coming into shelter at all. Because one thing, no matter how great the shelter is, it has really bad effects on families and particularly on children. Outcomes for children that are experiencing homelessness and go into shelter programs are far worse than their housed counterparts. So we try to mitigate against the trauma of actually coming into the shelter program. So that's kind of the first thing. And sometimes it's a very little amount of assistance. Can we buy you a plane ticket back to California, or can we get you back to Boston? Whatever. It might just be a gift card or a gas card or something that would help them. Prevention assistance is actually kind of what we're bracing for and have been doing a lot this year to try to keep people housed even during COVID, and as people lost hours at work. And there were a lot of people that have needed assistance with back rent. And so we have various sources of funding that will allow us to pay back rent or utility arrears to try and keep a family whole housed. So let me see, since January of 2021, Family Promise prevented 78 families from becoming homeless, 78 families with 169 people. That is by far the biggest program this year that we've been working on. And you all have provided support in doing that. You help us with that because, sometimes providing a holiday gift basket or a gift card to grocery stores, or in your case, you guys got Halloween costumes for people. Those are the kinds of things that are expenses that low-income families just can't handle and still pay rent. So I thank you for all your support in helping to keep those families housed.
And I think that's important to understand that the program continues even though we don't see families in our synagogue.
Right.
There's a lot of program work that goes on.
Right. So, and we can talk a little bit about the shelter. In comparison, there were 78 families that we served in the prevention program, but in the shelter program thus far this year, we've only served 10 families. And a lot of that was because once COVID hit, and you're probably all aware of this, we had to move the families, had to shut down the rotational program because a lot of our congregations were closing their doors. I think you guys had done that. And it just wasn't safe to have families and volunteers in a congregate setting. Right. So we had to move the families into hotel rooms, which is where they're still staying today. We have 5 families in shelter today. And they're in what's essentially called scattered site locations, hotel rooms. And So I know, I'm sure most of you are aware that Shirley chaired for us a transition task force to talk about, okay, here we are, we've got families in shelter. We had started to put together a host schedule for 2022 with the hope that we were going to be able to open, and quickly found that, you know, congregations weren't ready to do that. So we decided we really needed to investigate where we are with the rotational program. And Shirley could give you a summary of that, so I don't have to talk all the time.
Thanks, Tia.
Short summary. You can give them a short summary.
Well, it's interesting because everybody on the task force were long-serving volunteers, and we are all emotionally attached to the shelter, the rotation program. And yet, when we looked at the values of Family Promise, wanting to make the housing, what was the word we used? The least traumatic for
Right.
the families, we realized that the shelter program was very traumatic. You know, kids having to move week to week, meeting new people week to week. So even if the congregations could open up, it wasn't the best answer for the families. And so we designed a whole new way of doing this with scatter site. The hotels are not what we want. We want to find a number of apartments that Family Promise can lease and rotate families in and out of these apartments and give them the support. The question that I would actually throw open to the folks here, because everybody here is a volunteer of one sort or another, is it means that the volunteer work has to be different, right? Because we're not with the families night after night after night. And so the volunteers, and so we're thinking that we will have a calendar, and Dale and I have been talking about signing up for a week and then asking people to cook for a week, or we collect gift cards, you know, food gift cards for a week, or that we find tasks for the congregation to do. And even invite the families over for a meal at Shomrei if they want to come, but we can't make that mandatory, because if you get home from work and you're sitting in whatever space you have. So that's the design. I guess, Tia, you can talk about finding this kind of scatter housing, which is harder to find.
So our preference, of course, we're trying to find the least expensive, but also, you know, the nicest apartments we can that are that will be suitable for families. So we're in conversation with a couple of congregations actually that have properties. One is Park United Methodist in Bloomfield, has 2 single family homes. And some of you may know that they used one of those homes for congregate shelter for a while, but we would have to keep it to one family because shelter regulations require that essentially that we can only put one family under a roof for an extended period of time. We got away with congregate shelter in the past because we only hosted up to 14 people for a maximum of 14 days at a time for only 49 days in a year. There are actually exceptions to the shelter regulations that would allow us to do that. But if we started putting more than one family in a building, then we have to actually get licensed as a shelter. And there's all kinds of code and restrictions about fixed site shelters. So that's another reason for us moving to this scattered site model. It is a model that's is being used across the country. I should say that we are not the only Family Promise affiliate. And as you may know, there are over 200 affiliates across the country. Many of them, as a result of COVID, are moving away from the rotational program. And Union County has been doing this scattered site housing in apartments for almost a year now. They started early in COVID doing that. So So we're in good company. We have other people that have done this. We have other congregations that have come along. So, I mean, my hope is that all our congregations will stay with us during this process. It's a transition for all of us. We're going to learn our way as we go along. What we hope is we'll have energetic and enthusiastic congregations that are going to figure out how they can make this journey with us. So, and I know you have great coordinators at Shomrei, so I'm sure they'll figure out how they can best support.
And I have to say, speaking of coordinators, unfortunately, Dale had a funeral to go to today. Otherwise, she would be doing interviews. So you're getting the B team here with me. So, you know.
I was a little nervous about having Dale interview me. I'm glad. No, I wouldn't want anyone to lose a friend, but.
You know, it's interesting, just a moment on the task force work, if you guys are interested. What we found in talking to, yes, that's a good question, Linda. I'll talk to that in a minute. Hang on. What we found in, and you know what, it's a small group, so I'm going to let you ask your question. What we found in researching the congregational housing around the country is in those family promise groups, the way they succeeded was the volunteers came first and the family's needs came second. And so it was highly disciplined about families had to be in exactly on time and this had to be happen, and because it was for the volunteers. And actually, as we looked at that, we realized we wanted to turn that around and put the families at the center of the work we do. And I think that was an important one for us. It's going to be harder to do scatter site because we have to find, you know, 4 or 5 different venues where we can house them. And Tia, Linda asked a question, I'll ask it for her, but Linda's question, you know, with the congregational housing, you had a van that took the kids to their schools. What would you do about schooling for the kids in the scatter site?
So what was always the case, and I don't know what was happening when I wasn't here, Shirley, you know, the van could accommodate children sometimes. It depended on who was going where and what, you know, so that was hit or miss depending on the family. But what's true, and this is part of the federal law, when a child becomes homeless, wherever they go to receive shelter, the district where the child became homeless is responsible for providing transportation from the shelter, wherever it is, back to the district so that that child's education is not interrupted and they can continue school in the same district. The same thing would hold true if we do scattered site housing. And we will, it's just like solving, it's no different than what we have to do with families now in terms of moving out of shelter and into housing, where, you know, how are you going to ensure that your children attend school? Where is the daycare? You know, what kind of transportation do you have? How are we going to, you know, solve these barriers? And that will depend on the family. We'll have to do that with each family.
And the good news is Family Promise has some good caseworkers doing that.
Mm-hmm. It's also true if a family chose, if they were in shelter in Montclair, it's a little different because we don't have a fixed site shelter. I don't think this happened that often, but technically the parent could decide that they would rather have their child attend Montclair schools because that's where the shelter was. But the district where they became homeless is really responsible to send them back if that's what the family wants.
Interesting. We did do that. I remember working with Brenda on a couple of kids in Montclair.
Yes, some families choose to, you know, to stay where the shelter is.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, Tia, what's the future look like? You've got some plans, and I was thinking maybe we could talk about
Yeah. So the last piece that we haven't really talked about too much is the housing and stabilization. And so let me just wrap that up, and because that will lead into that will segue into the stabilization. So right now we have a couple of grants that will provide what's called rapid rehousing assistance, which is essentially rental assistance to help families move from homelessness to permanent housing. Sometimes it's as simple as paying a security deposit and first month's rent. Sometimes it's declining rental assistance over several months, could be up to a year. And let's see, this year we had 12 families basically in our Home for Good program. And some of those, some of those graduated this year. Some of them are still receiving rental assistance. Some of them just got first month's rent. It's a combination. Plus we have another 6 families that are residing in low income, well, let's put it this way, affordable set-aside units at the Walter G complex in Orange. So we partner with that agency and with the Public Housing Authority, and they were developed through the Alpert Group. That was another deal that happened before I left. And so we have 6 families that live in those apartments, and we continue to provide case management and the kind of support that you all do. When we do holiday gift drives, we do, cultural programs for children, all those families are included. So those are families that our staff continues to work with. So that's kind of the housing piece, what we do to try to stabilize families. I've just submitted a grant, Shirley. I'm not even sure if I told you this. I guess I did. And I'm hoping that we'll get approved to hire what's called a housing navigator, which is someone that would work with local landlords to try and develop relationships so that we could find scattered site housing for the shelter program, but also to help families access housing in Essex County. If we don't get funded, I know that the continuum of care for Essex County is trying to do the same thing, trying to create a housing, a series of housing navigators, and that's fine. We'll work with them either way, but somebody needs to be doing that work in Essex County. So that's one thing that we're building on, is how do we access and find housing? Because as you all know, housing is expensive in Essex County. When I moved back here, I live in Morris County right now because I couldn't afford housing in Essex County. So, so that's the housing piece. But the piece that I really want to talk about that we're excited about starting is the stabilization piece. We have really been looking, when I was director of the Family Promise in Orlando, we were looking for a really good stabilization program. And by that, how do you work with families that have put homelessness behind them and have moved into permanent housing? They don't want to talk to you. I was homeless, leave me alone. Now I'm not, right? There's no carrot, you're no longer paying rental assistance. There's no, they want to put that episode behind them. We're lucky if they pick up the phone and talk to us. But recidivism is a real thing. These families still continue to live on the edge. So what can we do to help families maintain their housing, especially if we've been paying rental assistance for a year? You don't want them to then be, that's a lot of money that we're putting out as taxpayers. You don't want them to become homeless again. Like, how can we help you maintain your housing? So we've looked at all kinds of different programs. And what we've landed on and what we started in Orlando before I left there was a partnership with another national organization like Family Promise. It's called Circles USA. And I'm going to read from some of their stuff because they describe it better than I do. Circles the whole point of circles is to reduce poverty, right? Remember at the beginning of this, I was talking about poverty being such a big factor in homelessness. So circles reduces poverty by creating intentional relationships across income lines. While middle income and high income families enjoy networks of support through their jobs, schools, and neighborhoods, families living in poverty rarely develop such contacts. Makes sense, right? Many who live in poverty are hardworking and motivated. So when a circle of support forms around them, advice is offered, contacts are shared, and the fears that keep people in poverty start to disappear. So what they do is basically match a low-income head of household, and in this case, they call them circle leaders, with volunteers who come from middle and upper income economic brackets, and they call those volunteers allies. And they basically match one circle leader with 2 to 3 allies. They go through training together. The circle leader goes through training, the allies go through training. And after, I don't know, it's like three months or so, they form this matched circle, which is the intentional relationship across lines. And the allies help the circle leader achieve their goals. It is a voluntary program. What sells the program is we tell this family, we're going to help you increase your household income. And there are going to be benefits and incentives to being a part of that program. And we're going to match you with some folks that are going to help you achieve these goals, so that we hope that it's going to make you and your family more stable across time. It's a really cool program. We're doing an informational session on January 6th. I wish I had more of that detail, but I can send it through Shirley. I think she may have heard about it already. So if any of you are interested in learning more about that, we're having some folks from Orlando are going to be on that call and talk about circles and their experience. They're going to have, I think they're going to have a volunteer that's been a part of it, talk about their experience, and potentially some circle leader as well. So it should be very informative. It's a program I'm very excited about. And we applied for a grant recently, and it was rejected for this program. So we actually have a private donor who's going to fund the launch of this program. So we're really excited about that. And I really want to prove this funder they were wrong. We're gonna get really great results.
So just so people know, John put Circle's website in the chat if you want to look at the organization.
Yeah. Oh, great. Thanks.
So yeah, he shared that. So Tia, I think, what are you laughing?
I think that Adrian did it.
Adrian
Remember
did it.
that Adrian is running the
I know she
publication.
is.
So Adrian
so
did it. John
funny.
gets credited with a lot of things, but he didn't do this.
Adrian did
That's
it.
why I was
Adrian,
Adrian.
you believe that I didn't give you credit? I'm so sorry. I'm so used to saying John did it.
Not gonna have two kinds.
So I want to stay with this for a second because Linda had a question and another question. She's just populating the chat room.
I should look at the chat. I can look at the chat.
All right. So her question was about, so let me see if I can say it, and Linda, you can jump in. She says, it sounds like the role of the volunteers, putting the Circle program aside for a moment, which is a huge commitment for people and could have great outcomes. But in the shelter program, the role of the volunteers is more to donate, whether it's financial, whether it's food, whether it's gifts and Halloween costumes. you know, for people who are both in the shelter or in their apartments and sort of getting their feet on the ground. What Linda was asking was, what's the staffing like at Family Promise and what roles do they play? Is that fair?
A little. I'm guessing there are a lot of different professionals, more than that were in the beginning, to support all the programs you're talking about to prevent homelessness and to help them find apartments and maintain them and budget. When I started volunteering, there was a very skeletal staff, and my impression is, in order to do all the things you've just described that you've been doing, you must have hired a lot more people.
Yes and no. We
No.
have since I've been there, way back when I was there before, we had a case manager and a program director. That's what we've had. We just recently got additional COVID money to hire another case manager to work with COVID clients. So we got that position funded. So we've added one case manager, and I told you I've applied for a housing navigator. Doesn't mean I'm going to get it, but we've applied for it. So that's it. I mean, and then we have the Melissa, who's our volunteer community engagement manager.
Yep.
That was a position that was added before I came back.
What does that mean?
Wait, Tia, we should explain.
Yeah.
Tia was the executive director at IHN in
From
And then-
2008 to 2013.
and then she went to Florida. She went to Orlando for a larger position and a larger demographic. And then she decided she needed to come back to New Jersey because she missed us. That's not entirely true. Her grandkids are up here. And it was just at the point where Family Promise was looking for a director. It was beshert, truly beshert. That's the Yiddish word for it was meant to happen. But now you want to know what the.
We also have 3 interns. We have a master's of social work and licensed, and a clinical social worker as our program director. So we have 3 interns, 1 from Montclair State, and interestingly enough, 2 are from the University of Central Florida, but they live in Montclair. Yeah, Central Florida has a great social work program, and they've been awesome, and they're with us for a year. So that's an increase. We don't have to pay for those positions, but they help a lot.
And did you get do you want to know what the volunteer coordinator does, Linda? Was that your last?
Yeah, I
question?
was wondering, in addition to us giving them financial support when they need it, be it food or costumes or whatever, we've been hosting people, so we've developed relationships with people and talked to them and everything. Other than giving money under the new model, what would you see the volunteers' role? Are you seeing them move into Circle USA, or do you see a different role in Family Promise?
I think we're still dealing with COVID. And so we don't know how that's going to be. The hardest thing for us to figure out and imagine at this point is the interactions that were part of the shelter program before. Right now, because we're just starting out, we're just trying to nail the logistics. We got to feed these families. So that's kind of at the top of our brain. So Linda, honestly, we haven't figured that piece out yet. The one program that I know would bring volunteers and families together is that Circles program.
Okay.
I haven't, it doesn't mean there won't be some component within the shelter program, but we're trying to avoid having the kinds of activities that would require so we get into the place where we're requiring families to show up for something that they don't want to do, that just going to be annoying to volunteers because they don't want to be there, So we still have to figure that out, honestly. I don't know if there's something we can do virtually. I don't know if we're just going to engage volunteers in doing specific workshop. We haven't
No, it's okay. I was just asking because
work in
listening
progress.
to your presentation, I was hearing more
Yeah.
financial stuff
Linda.
going on. May I
Well,
ask one
I'm
last que-
actually, I asked about that also. It's a concern of mine because, you know, all the congregations that families rotated to, I always worried, Shirley, I don't know if you remember, we actually had conversations in the past about what this must be like for families to always be shifting around. I was always so worried about that. And, you know, wanted to do the best that I could for the families when they with us, because I kept thinking how awful, right? What an awful situation to be in. And so I think that giving them something where they're not moving around, you know, that's a really good thing. But I worry that if the congregations that were so connected to Family Promise, if we just become, you know, I mean, yeah, we can solicit donations, money donations, you know, goods, donations of goods, you know, whatever. But if you lose the connection, I think that will just fall off over time. You know, the way to, you know, keeping the congregations engaged in, you know, in some other emotional way, right? I mean, it isn't about us, but if in fact we don't keep engaged in that way, then I
Right.
think that there'll be a loss of interest, and people will say, you know, I'd rather donate to this other organization. You know, it'll become fractured. And so I get that you're in transition now, and that's what I'm mulling in my mind. How can, you know, what can we do as a congregation?
Right.
Yeah.
The hard fact, the hard fact, if we had congregations like Shomrei that were willing to, if we had 12 congregations that were willing to host 4 times a year, we wouldn't be in this place.
Congregation. So in our research among the congregations who were in the network, congregations were falling off, because if you look at who's in this room, we are of a certain age. Lynn and I talked about this today when we did the mesh meal. Younger families came in, they were wonderful with the children, but they wouldn't run it. And, you know, Dale and I are old. I'm old, Dale's middle-aged. I want that on the record. So the model was coming apart, Sarita, and it was not the best for the families. Like you said, we worried about that a lot. So I think we have to find meaningful ways. And you know, Dale and I are on these coordinator calls, and I think maybe we need a group, we get together a group at Shomrei and say, twice a year, we want to be, quote, hosting. What can we do that's meaningful? Can we invite them for a concert at Shomrei? You know, can we do a little family concert? I don't know, but it's hard to think about, as Tia said, because COVID has made all of us fearful of doing anything anyway. So the combination of congregations getting tired and older and COVID locking us down. But this is something we have to think about. If we want to continue to contribute to Family Promise and keep the families going and be supportive, we need to figure it out. I mean, we have, you know, we have school psychologists or school social workers. I'm looking at Linda. We have people who have all sorts of skills who might be able to service families if that's what they need. I don't know the answer to that, but please keep thinking about it.
So,
Can I ask
I mean,
another question? Good.
Go ahead, Lynn.
Okay. The other question I was thinking about is that when you talk about these circles people, and you're talking about economic, you know, middle class, upper class. And one of the things I guess I sensed, and I could have read the whole situation wrong, is that it's not just the economic situation, but our backgrounds. I mean, I could talk to them and identify with everything they're talking about, but they look at me and they see my white face, or they see someone who's had a charmed life. They don't know anything about me, but that's the assumption. So when you're talking about getting these people to volunteer, are we able to draw not just from congregations that are middle-class whites, and you know, are you getting volunteers from other sectors that would be more diverse? Because That's something I've been struggling with throughout this entire pandemic, is that it seems to be a racial thing, not just economic, that's going on here. And when you talk about people not wanting to come out or necessarily engage with us, they have a house, they don't want to engage. Is it my face they don't want to engage with, or is it that they're going to wait until the next crisis? Am I saying that well enough that you understand what I'm saying?
Yes, and that was one of my concerns when we were launching in Orlando. Same thing. You know, when Karen Olson first set up these networks, she very deliberately went to sort of more wealthy suburban communities, and in New Jersey that ended up, so there was a big segregation, right, between where the families came from and where our volunteers came from. So yeah, that is a bridge. We're going to try and get more of the congregations that are predominantly African-American involved in circles if we can.
So
But I would prefer to have a healthy mix, you know.
Yes. No,
Yeah.
mix is what I want, but I had a
Yeah.
sense that it was more, it might have been more skewed.
Mhm.
I don't know.
Mhm. No,
But it's
I'm
interesting
conscious
about
of
that because, you know, I think we take for granted the networks that we have. And I think one of the things, you know, that as you said, these families don't have those networks. And so, you know, it's really how the circles are perceived by the families. You know, we're not the white knights coming in. We are people who are privileged to have networks, and we want to provide that network to you so that you can also, you know, have something that we've always taken for granted. I mean, so, you know, it's, you know, how do you present that in a way, right, that doesn't look like we're imposing things from above? We're trying to offer them something that we take for granted and they've been denied, right? That's part of what reparations are all about. So I think it's hard to achieve that balance.
right.
So one of the other pieces of the Circle program that I haven't talked about is that there are all these resource teams that we have to put together to launch circles. One is a recruitment team, and that's recruiting volunteers. One is a resource team. Where are we going to have these meetings, and they're weekly meetings? How are we going to feed the people that attend those meetings if we ever get back in person? So there's lots of opportunities for volunteers to get involved. There's a concurrent children's program, you know, so there's activities for children, et cetera. But one of the things that has come out of the Circles program as these networks grow is what they call a big view team. And the interesting thing is that the allies having work, it's a deliberate mechanism for allowing the circle leaders to have a voice that impacts advocacy. So they create this team, and you start to invite in, you know, your congressman, your, you know, the mayor, all these people, because now we have, you know, this combination of people that, you know, allies that are learning, like, what are the barriers? Like, what are these people facing, and how can we systemically try to alleviate some of those barriers? So that's another whole piece of circles that I haven't even talked about with anybody. But there is another whole advocacy piece. It's a two-way street, in other words.
So
You're getting connected, you know, the family's getting connects, you know, help networks and connections, but you're getting a network and connection too.
So are we going to end on an optimistic note that there may be ways that we can engage in reducing homelessness and find ways to do this? I don't know the answer, but I think, you know, maybe the circles, maybe advocacy. Tia said to me the other day, she said, Shirley, the first thing you have to do is get people in houses so we can solve the problems of whether they're hungry or whether they need psychiatric help, whether the kids need school help. We've got to get them in houses. That was what you said to me, Tia. And so I'm hoping we can do that. And actually, I'm really fearful because I sit on the Home Corps board and I know what's going to happen when all of these people who haven't been paying their rents, when it comes due in January. I'm terrified because it's the same issue. If you don't have the rent, you can't fix the buildings. If you don't fix the buildings. So there's a sense of despair, but I hope that we can find little ways to solve it. There is some, I have a good piece of news. 2 of Tia's families from Family Promise will go into a new unit that Home Corps owns. And that on 7 Sylvan, and that should be housing for
That'll
2.
be great.
Mhm. Yeah.
Awesome.
So with that, I think we're just at time. And Tia, I can't thank you enough for doing this because,
Thank you.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's
yeah,
great to talk to all of
Thank you.
thank you. Thank you for
Thank you
coming
very
back
much.
and thanking you for doing this. And I do need to make a pitch for January because January is very special to me. Caitlin Condell, who is a curator at the Cooper Hewitt, who happens to be a very important part of my life and my son's life, but mostly my life. It's all about me. She's going to come talk to us about the newest exhibit at the Cooper Hewitt. It's called Underground Modernist, E. McKnight Kaufer. And we're going to spend a night at the museum with Caitlin. She's going to give us a virtual tour. She's done this and it's really amazing. And then if we really like it, if we want to get ourselves into New York, she will give us an in-person tour, but we'll see. You know, again, like I said, it's COVID, who knows? So tune in January for a very different, lighter picture. And thank you again, Tia, for talking
Thank
to
you.
us. And we'll find ways to work with you.
Okay. I look forward to it. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you.
all. All
And
right. Have a good evening.
have a great evening. Good night,
Bye-bye.
everybody.
Good
Bye.
night.